Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. How have the tactics and strategy of protest changed over the years? 46 years ago, there was a violent end to a 3-day inmate protest over conditions in the St. Louis City Jail. More than 30 people were hurt. That response triggered a 21-day protest outside the jail. Tonight, a special panel will discuss that incident. It's titled Justice in the Prison System, from the 1972 sit-in to today. It will compare and contrast the issues faced by inmates in the justice and penal systems since the 1972 protest. Joining me in studio are Regina Dennis Nana and Bobby Brother Bob Williams. They were citizen negotiators in the 1972 City Jail sit-in. Tori Russell is a community activist and protester who has been involved with demonstrations after Michael Brown and through the Stockley protests. Thank you all so much for being with us. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Regina, let me begin with you. Can you kind of set the stage for what was going on in 1972 that led to this protest?
What was taking place was the inmates had expressed concerns about different their conditions. And I should preface this by saying in March of 1972, there's a committee called the Committee for Equal Justice. And they had started, it was a citizens group made up of multi-talented individuals who were concerned about the conditions in the jail. And they had started meeting with the jail officials as related to overcrowdedness and seeing what they can do to reduce the load there. And so what they were trying to do was put up a program for releasing individuals on their own recognizance. And so that led to that program continued, but the inmates were constantly still concerned about the lack of toothpaste, toothbrushes, soap, towels, salt, food, hygiene. They had a whole list of things that they were still concerned that were concerned about that had taken place for some time.
So, and Brother Bob, you were involved as a negotiator during this process, as I understand it, in which citizens were negotiating with whom? Jail officials, city politicians, or with whom?
We had them all in there. Yeah. And I was the national coordinator for the United Front here in St. Louis. Reverend Charles Corn, who was one of the founders of the Black Liberators here from Cairo. So we had the United Front down there, and we was an activist type of organization, so we was invited to come in and to be there with the inmates to see exactly what we could do, because we had so much action during that time. You had the peace movement. You had the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. We had a lot of activism like I begin to see take place here now after the Ferguson effect.
Yeah. And Regina, what happened in those negotiations? Obviously, they were not successful.
Well, I wouldn't say they were totally not successful, because there were some wins and there were some gains. And the list of demands were quite long. There were 12 of them. And so we won some, and then some were put on hold, and eventually they came about. And I think the point that what we want to emphasize is that the city eventually issued a progress report, and that progress report indicated the types of things that what they could do and what they could not do. And it was clear that they had made some clear gains, such as they had allocated $5,000 to improve food conditions, and they established an initial stock of some 650 small toothpaste tubes. Policy manuals were set up, visiting regulations were changed, round-the-clock medical care was now available, some recreation activities, and plans for an inmate council. So these are all gains and things in which we feel were won.
But didn't these gains come after the protests outside, the 21-day protest?
Oh, yes,
outside?
They all took place after the protests.
What I want to get to, Bob, maybe you can bring me up to speed on this. Something happened in those negotiations inside, which brought in St. Louis City Police, and a lot of heads were banged.
I think Sister Regina should address that one on it. Yes, a lot of heads was banged, including my arm. I was hit so hard. My glasses went one way, my sandals went another one, and Only thing I could hear were the women and the dogs bark and the tear gas and the inmates. And a bunch of them fell on top of me, which I think really helped save me. But Regina was much more in the front line of what the negotiation that was going on that.
Before you start, Regina, let me just point out there were a lot more women in the workhouse or in the jail at that time than there were men.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
What took place, we had really been meeting for about 3 days, and the meetings were taking place quite well. And Mr. John Bass, he said that as long as there was nonviolence, that the negotiations could continue. But what took place was at the city hall level, there was some concern about the inmates being in the jail. And then at the city jail level, at the warden level, he was concerned as well, too. And so as we were in the jail, what took place that kind of halted the negotiations was that one of the inmates decided to hit the warden. And the warden was already exaggerated and already already upset, wanting this whole situation to end, so he called in the police.
Mm-hmm. And it was an extremely violent, Bobby's point.
It was extremely violent, and that it led to, they brought in some 30 riot policemen with clubs and 25-some dogs, and they beat us severely.
And Sister Betty Lee, who was head of Proud Magazine at the time, was in there with us. And we also had Pearlie Evans, who was one of the top administrative assistants to later on to Congressman Clay Sr. Betty Lee was bitten on the leg and the calf by one of the German Shepherd dogs.
Tori Russell, let me turn to you. You're much too young to remember any of this or have been around for any of this. What are you thinking when you hear this story about what it was like then and what it's like now?
St. Louis still hasn't changed. It seems like it may still be 1972. As someone who just left the Justice Center last night, who go to the workhouse at least once a month, the conditions are still the same. So we went in the summer when the protests started again. It seemed like it's reliving history. We were sweating. Me and John Collins Muhammad, alderman, in the North City. We did a walkthrough, sweat through the suits, sweat through our dress shirts.
You were sweating last night?
No, not last night. In the summer.
Yeah.
Or you go in the winter, it's cold, and so it's the same conditions. The inmates are complaining about food, quality of food, hygiene products, mice, roaches, rats. And really the big issue is why they're in there, which is bail. People can't afford $500 or $1,000, and I don't think that's a reason for someone to sit down there for months or years.
You're basically saying things haven't changed.
St. Louis, we always say that Ferguson is just like Selma. It's 1955 with Wi-Fi. That's the only difference.
With Wi-Fi. Brother Bob, what's your reaction to that? Hearing this young man say that, 46 years after your activity, things haven't changed very much.
In part, what we have had in the civil rights movement, the old civil rights movement under Dr. King and some other people, they did not do a real good job of laying the framework once he was assassinated, who was going to be able to carry on. And when I think a lot of injustice had been done by the time I'll be 76 this year. Been sentenced to 5 and 5 years as a political prisoner, and then to come back out with these young people and we see them, what did we leave them that they have to build upon? So basically they were sort of naked in Ferguson, raw and uncut. They came off the plantation. They ain't scared and they ain't going back. And so what I'm saying is that we have to now do a better job, because I think we need a new civil rights movement, and these young people are going to have to we'll share our experience with those who want to.
Regina, your thoughts about what the young man has just said here and how things have or have not changed over the years?
I've been away for a while, for over 30, 40 years. And so when I hear these types of remarks, I feel saddened, very, very saddened, because I would think that what we did, there were some changes that took place, but that was then. But it looked like the structures and systems that we put in place, there was a breakdown. And it looks as if that when they moved to this Justice Center, the things even before then, because I was able to talk with Mr. Frank Sussman, who was involved in the jails from 1982 to 2000. And he tells me by the time that he got there, some of the things that we put in place had broken down. So it seems like unless there's a constant monitoring evaluation from the community, there's an advisory committees and advisory boards that are set up, then there's going to be a breakdown.
Frank Sussman was an attorney, as I recall.
Yes, he was an attorney.
I think ultimately he wound up as an ambassador to the Court of St. James, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly. Yeah, yes. In any case. So I guess what I'm interested in seeing here is how tactics and strategy have changed, or have they? Do you think that the strategy, Tori, that you're using today is really any different than that was used 45 years ago?
I don't. People still do sit-ins, march, protest. People come to protest probably, having a more historical analysis. I've seen tear gas. I've seen movies where they threw tear gas in Selma. So I'm going to come prepared. I'm going to come with tear gas, mask, and all these things. I think those are probably different. We do less singing, probably more rapping. Soundtrack has changed, but the demands and how the police and the state meets us is probably more the same.
Regina?
I think that, yes, some of the methods may still be the same. You still have the protesters, but I'm not sure whether or not we still have the negotiators. As we were outside protesting, there was always, as I always like to say, a multi-talented group of people who were on the inside. They would come outside and protest, but they also were able to go to the boardrooms and the tables and sit and negotiate and articulate the demands and eventually get them narrowed down. So there was that communication that took place. And also we organized those press conferences, handed out press releases, and we very well articulated them. So I'm not quite sure whether or not those strategies and approaches, which I personally feel were beneficial and were effective, whether or not they're being used today.
I mean, I would say yes and no. And so early on in Ferguson, there were conversations with the White House. And so they would call us, call other protesters. I think the difference is that as we watch the 60s and 70s, I think the breakdown is the negotiator tends not to advocate for the entire community. And so people who used to protest with us joined the Ferguson Commission, never to return back to the black community. Some of us went into the White House, had a conversation with Obama, never to return back to the black community. And so they negotiated something not for the entire community. And so we would like our negotiations in the streets. Our first demand out of Ferguson was to ask Barack Obama to come to Ferguson to actually see, bring his daughters, bring people who can see and understand, and maybe, just maybe, you'll actually bring change, not for one person, not for a group or organization, but for the community as a whole.
I have to take a break. We'll do that now to continue the conversation. We are talking about demonstrations and protests and how they have or have not changed over the decades, actually. We're focusing on a 1972 situation in the city jail in St. Louis, which turned to be a very violent end to a protest. Back in just a moment, my guests are Bobby Williams and Regina Dennis-Nana, citizen negotiators in that 1972 incident. And Tori Russell was with us. He's a community activist and protester, much younger than the other two guests. He's giving us today's perspective. We'll get back into this conversation in just a moment. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. And welcome back to our conversation on how protests have changed over the years at St. Louis City Jail and related institutions. Regina, let me come back to you. If you felt that 1972 was successful and that many of the demands that were made by the inmates of the city jail were met, how can you call it successful if similar conditions exist today?
Well, I think there's been a breakdown. There's definitely been a breakdown for the lack of continuity. I think that the policies that were set in place somewhere along the line, they may have they're not being adhered to, or they're not being followed, or maybe people don't know about them, or they've changed. But I think that we had. And let me say that I think we made some gains. There were other gains that we may not have made, but I think for the most part, for the basic things, that we were able to achieve them.
In terms of tactics and strategy, and Brother Bob, let me go to you on this. I've mentioned this many times on the programs. We had an interesting conversation a few years ago with Percy Green, whom you all know, yes, and with Frankie Freeman, the late Frankie Freeman, yes, and they had a really interesting discussion on the rule of law versus civil disobedience. You can guess who took which side. Frankie Freeman, of course, the rule of law, and Percy Green, we know his background, civil disobedience was his stock in trade. Brother Bob, let me ask you about that. Which do you think is the more effective means of making a point and getting a positive result?
I think we need both. I think Brother Torrey Russell had touched upon it. If you have the negotiators that go and do not come back to the community, we do not have a consistent black or white leadership here to keep the community informed. So if you have someone like a Percy Green, who was really one of the best in civil disobedience, that we're now going to need as part of the solution to have those young people like Torrey and them who want to be trained in that. One thing on the solution, we have the Arts City Defenders that we did not have there. We have community policing organizations set up now. We have the ACLU, who has always, been around. So now I'm thinking that with the new civil and human rights movement, I think that we need for justice right now. We got to have equality with justice, that these young people will have some continuity. So we want to set up at a building now. We have at 3103 to 11 North Grand. Now, this is just south of Natural Bridge. They can have their own facilities. They can have continuity and to network with each other.
Torrey, do you have faith and confidence in these groups? We had Blake Strode, the new head of our city defenders, on yesterday. A very committed young man.
I've heard about him. I've never talked to him, never seen him. But I think it's all about kind of like what we get into, which is building the continuity, but also capacity in the black community. And so we know the federal government came in, brought drugs, and locked up community leaders in the 60s and the 70s. That's not happenstance. That was targeted from Nixon on. And so we have to look at these policies, but also looking inside to our community. And it's like, why don't we have these organizations, these united fronts, continuing from the 60s and 70s? Why aren't the young activists sitting down with Percy Greens and Jamal Rogers and the Norman Says? Why wasn't it a torch passed or a blueprint passed on? I think that is the criticism that the youth in the street have of our elders, and not directly to be Percy Green. But our elders had to have that blueprint. But now the younger people are trying to create their own blueprint. And it come through tear gas soaking streets.
Regina and Bob, do you feel that you've done enough to communicate with the next generation?
In fact, that's where I'm very passionate about sharing this information. I had a file in my house. Had the album with this materials in it. Mm-hmm. And I said that I got to get this out so young people can have it. Mm-hmm. Or I don't want to die and leave it stuck in the closet, then my family or somebody come and throw it into a dumpster. And where I think that some of these materials, that even we're going to have handouts this evening, that we're going to pass out our demands, how we held our press conferences, and we gave the press conference with the press releases on it, and with the United Front and the Committee for Equal Justice, and then how the city responded. Mm-hmm. So we're going to give all that out. Hopefully the young people can take it and say, okay, maybe we can do some of this. You don't have to do it all, but at least you have access to it. So that's one of the purposes for this evening, is to be able to disseminate and share this information so our young people know how to do some of the things that we didn't do. And I don't see them doing now.
And that would be a panel discussion that we would have around this evening. And then I can be reached at 314-398-5478, 398-5478. Now, we need the people to come on board. We need to quit complaining. Young people saying, hey, we are willing, some of them are willing to meet with us old activists to share our experiences with them. The building's at 103 3011 North Grand. So let's make it happen so that we can end with the protest demonstration, get down to serious business with the whole world looking at us, organizing economic plans and things that these young people want.
The panel discussion I alluded to in the introduction that you just mentioned is happening at the Missouri History Museum tonight at 7 o'clock. The title of it is Justice in the Prison System from the 1972 Sit-In to Today. 7 o'clock tonight at the History Museum.
Can I mention the other panelists, too?
Sure.
The other panelists will include the lawyer from the Arch City Defender, Nicole Nelson, and then we're going to have another activist who will come, Daisha Polk. She'll be on the panel as well. And then we're going to have a former inmate, Deidre Wortham. And so we have those three people. So that's going to be a nice mixture of what took place historically and what's going on today.
Deidre is a grandmother when she was arrested out there on a traffic violation. So she'll be there tonight. I think she's about 46 years old, and it's going to be interesting.
That's a story that we've heard more than once. Yes, I'm going to bring in a listener right now because I think Harlan in St. Louis is going to make a point that is apropos at this moment. Go ahead, Harlan.
Thank you so much. It's good to be on the line. Enjoy the show and appreciate the guests that are on today. It seems like there's a really distinct difference between the protesters of today and the protesters of 50, 40, 30 years ago. And I'm wondering if there could be a little bit more discussion about the foundational difference, which is really a foundational belief system that doesn't seem to be shared among today's protesters as they were before. In the 60s, you could really clearly see that there was a commitment to faith and hope and a shared sense of spirituality among protesters. And it was undeniable that it was sort of anchored in sort of a Judeo-Christian belief set. But in addition to that, there was a strong commitment to our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and a general belief and understanding of what America's ideals are. I don't think they hear that in today's protest as much or even at all, and I'm hoping that your guest can address that.
Harlan, thank you. Let's put that one to Tori.
Yes. Thanks for the layup. On the other hand, I think the problem is that if you start with the Constitution, I was property. And so that Constitution was never meant for me. That Bill of Rights wasn't meant for me. And so we have to think about human rights outside of civil rights. So if you have a civil rights movement, you have to play ball only inside the United States of America. And so what we want to do is look at the global aspect, look at the UN, which we did out of Ferguson. We actually went to the UN with Mike Brown's parents, and we want to bring those things to an international level. If you have to leave it in this hands, we live in a democratic city, only one of two in the state. The rest of the state is completely Republican. We have a Republican president who thinks my ancestors come from a bad country. And so we have to understand that in America, be it a Democrat, Jay Nixon, or a Republican in Greitens, they don't love black people. And so we can't keep going with the rule of law because it used to be legal to have slaves. It used to be legal to pull me over and have stop and frisk, and this is recent. And so we have to get out of the American legality and get to the international stage.
Our time is winding down. Let me ask you, Regina and Bob, what advice do you have for this young man about proceeding forward? How to?
I would say that we certainly need to get to stay focused, to continue the protesting. I would never say stop protesting. I would say continue the protesting, but at the same time, I would say let people know why you're protesting. That's the area what I don't think that we elders, we understand. You can galvanize and get people together on Facebook and get to the street, but then we're not quite sure why you're there and what do you want. You've got to find ways to articulate your demands, as well as you got to find ways to be able to get your core people, get it to the table, and be able to negotiate.
I've been able to pull together with a group of people. I'm the point man on the sort of like the chief architect to develop this new civil and human rights movement that we need to have with equality, but we have to have justice. And we say to the young people, come on board. Let's organize from where you all see things. We can share our experience and resources, and let's do it. We do have the facility at 31 Old 3 to 11 North Grand, just south of Natural Bridge. I can be reached at 314-398-5478. Thank you.
We'll put all that information on our website, Bob.
That'll work. Thank you.
Final question is going to go to Tori here. What advice do you have for these two with regard to interacting and working with young people, your peers?
I would say my only criticism for elders is really it's an East African kind of a thought. It's how are the children? And so in East Africa, they greet the other tribes with how are the children? And if you respond, they're taken care of. That means that you're taking care of your future. And so if we're not doing the best strategies and tactics, if our word's not getting out there, if you think we're not at the table, that means that, one, someone's at the seat that we're supposed to be in, or our elders and our leaders that were supposed to be before us are not connecting us to the right tables and the right people. And so we need the resources, we need the wisdom and the knowledge, and we need hugs and love from our elders. And so that'll be.
As Queen, I have another title. I have another title too, and that title I was enthroned as a Queen Mother. A Queen Mother. So a Queen Mother in Africa means one who takes care of children and takes care of the community. So Queen Mother Regina is here to provide advice and care and love and to share your knowledge, my knowledge that I have gained over some 40 years or more, some 60 years, I mean, to share that with our young people in the community.
Well, I'm sure that's welcome news to Tori and to others. We've got to end it right there. I want to thank you all so much for being with us. This has been a very interesting discussion, and I appreciate Bobby Williams and Regina Dennis Nana for being with us. They were negotiators in the 1972 city jail disturbance that we started talking about today. Tori Russell also with us. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Community activist and a man obviously very much committed to his cause. A reminder, the panel discussion, Justice in the Prison System from 1972 sit-in to today at the Missouri History Museum tonight at 7 o'clock. They'll be participating in that. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.